start with, how did you get into radio in the first place?
Well, it really was a fairly fortuitous thing, as a matter of fact, because when I came down from Cambridge, I was became a schoolmaster, which I enjoyed very much. And then I did a little broadcasting, very amateur broadcasting, mainly on amateur football, because I played football at the university, and that was my main strength, I suppose. One has strengths.
Yes.
I liked it because, you see, you can get bitten by broadcasting. It really is. You can, and you know this very well.
Yes.
You can. It gets hold of you, and I liked it. I was also very lucky. I've been lucky all through my life, frankly, so far. I was very lucky because I had the right sort of people to advise me. Because at that stage, it's very easy to compare what seems to be a fairly ordinary existence as a schoolmaster. It seems to be ordinary, it isn't. It's a very exciting job, but it seems ordinary. And then the idea that somehow broadcasting and radio and television is all very glamorous and what have you, which it partly is, but it isn't as simple as that. And I think I might perhaps have made even the wrong decisions, but I had some very good people to advise me. One in particular who's been a very good friend of mine, which is Cliff Morgan, because Cliff at that time was a director of television, and I was lucky because I was able to go and stay with him for 6 weeks. Again, schoolmasters have splendid holidays, and I had 6 weeks with him, and I saw it all working, and I liked it even more. So I knew then to start with that that's what I wanted to do. Now, it might have been a total disaster. At least I knew I was right in going for it. I wanted to have a go for it. And then again, I was lucky with a man called Angus Mackay, who was one of the great men in radio, who started sport in radio with Eamon Andrews in Sports Report 20 odd years ago.
Yes.
And Angus was very good. Angus was very professional, and after a lot of interviews, he finally took me on and terrified me for 6 months. He's a terrible man in that sense, but the greatest professional I've ever met. And from then on, it just went on, I suppose. But as I say, I keep saying I was really very lucky.
Did you start as a football commentator?
No, when I first came into the business, I started on the lowest possible rung of the ladder, which is what we call a sports assistant, which means that you do just about everything and anything that happens to come along. That is, you are a sub-editor, you go out and interview, and above all, as far as I was concerned, I went around the regions, because regions are different. Regional broadcasting is different, and I spent some time in Birmingham with Midland Region, and then Manchester with Northern Region, and Glasgow with the Scottish Region. So in the first 12 months, what you really are doing is putting on your boiler suit and going around and finding out how everything works. Because Angus Mackay always used to say, you've got to know how the boys work behind the glass. You've got to know how everything works in broadcasting. You can't just ponce around, and be a performer. We all like being performers.
Yes.
Because, again, as you know, you've got to like showing off a little bit. Unless you like showing off, you're not a performer. But that's what I did first of all. I spent the first 12 months learning the business. That was the first thing. And then after that, my first broadcasting was reading racing results. That was terribly exciting, the first time I read racing results. So it was absolutely splendid. Again, very good training. Very good training. It's clarity, it's expression, and above all, two things that he used to say. I keep going back to Angus because he really was such a splendid man for me. He always used to say, make it simple. That's the important thing. Because if you're in doubt and you're saying it, the person who's listening to it, there's no way he's going to understand. So even reading things like racing results, I used to find 10 years ago, was very good for clarity of voice, clarity of thought. And that's, you wouldn't believe, but one would come out of a studio having read racing results and thought, that's it, I'm a broadcaster, But I've never regretted that. And then the next stage was to introduce a program we used to call it Sports Desk, which is a small 10-minute. Little story, if you've got time, to tell you about that. The very first one I did, I was absolutely terrified. And one of the things we were linking into was a tennis match that was going, international tennis match in Belgrade. And I'd been given all the routine, that in front of you have a script, and I was linking in 3 particular people at that time, in the 10 minutes. And one was a man called Geoffrey Green of the Times, who is the great football correspondent, now a very, very good friend of mine. And he was also tennis correspondent of the Times at that time. He's changed since then. And he was in Belgrade, and I came on the air with my headlines, quaking slightly. Green light goes on, you're on the air. And I said good evening, did all the things, began to feel a little confident, and then I said over to Geoffrey Green. And there was nothing, just atmospherics and crackling and what have you, see. And then I thought, well, no, it's all right, because that's the test of a good broadcaster. And the producer's now saying in my earpiece, it's all right, go on, apologise and go on. And I remembered, and I said, I'm sorry, we can't get hold of Geoffrey Green. And we moved on to something else. And then the producer said in my earpiece, go on talking, but listen to what I'm saying to you, which again is normal once you've been a broadcaster, again, as you know.
Yes.
He said, cue in again. So I said, well, we'll try another time to get Geoffrey Green. And we went, and again we got this awful atmospherics and nothing at all. And by now I am beginning to lose my sense of proportion here. And there's now, I looked at the clock, and there was something like a minute and a half to go. And I'm quite certain that subconsciously I'm saying, well, in that case, we can't possibly go back to Geoffrey Green now, because there just isn't time for a report on the tennis. And there was now something like a minute to go, and I'm reading out of what we call odd, which are odd items that you have in front of you, until the 7 o'clock news. And the producer came on my ear and said, we have now got him, just go over for at least the present score. There's no time for a report. He's saying all this in my ear while I'm reading something else. He said, just say we've just got time to at least get the latest position. So I said, well, we've just got time to get the latest position, Geoffrey Green. There was again a little bit of crackling, and Geoffrey's voice came over very clear, saying, where the bloody hell is London? As clear as a bell. Now, that's the stage, I think, where I very nearly fell apart, you see. And what I ought to have said, and would have said since then, is, we're still having trouble. But what I did say was, I'm sorry, we still don't seem to be able to contact Geoffrey Green. We went off the air and we had dozens of phone calls straight away from people who said, well, I heard Geoffrey Green, and that was the very first broadcast I did on Sports Desk.
Oh,
very first one. Traumatic it was. Great training though, great training.
Have you ever done the, what do they call, anchorman on the Saturday
afternoon
show?
Yes. I took this over. Eamon, of course, did it for a long while. And then we had another Irishman called Liam Nolan, who was with us for 6 months. Very nice man, Liam. And then Liam went back to Ireland. And then I took it over, which again is a very exciting programme to be in. When I first took it over, you see, it was just Sports Report. We used to have a programme called Sports Parade in the morning, between 12 and half past. And then Sports Report at 5 o'clock with that great SIG tune. You remember? Da-dum, 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 da-dum. Great, marvellous, magic moment that was. Now, you see, it's a much more sophisticated business. We now go on the air at 1:30 or 2:30 here in Germany, right through. It's an exciting program to be in, and what I do now, I do 3 of them under the contract I do now. I stay in for 3, and then I go out for 6. In other words, I do commentaries for 6 Saturdays. I stay in for 3. But it's still a very exciting program to be in. They work very hard on it. Cliff Morgan, of course, is now the editor, and he's got a very, very good, strong team. And we work very hard on it throughout the week. I shall be going back from here, for example, to work on the program straight away for Saturday.
As anchorman?
That's right, this Saturday. And we work on it very carefully, we try to balance it. You start off with an obvious framework, that the highlights of the day. I mean, for example, last Saturday when we were in, the highlight clearly was Barbarians playing the All Blacks. That was one. You had 2 fairly rich races from Sandown Park. You had the second half commentary of a football match, which you always have. So those are your basics, and then you work around that. You work around where you're going to have interviews, whether you're going to have feature pieces. But it's still, the 5 o'clock one, it's still one when it all accelerates.
Yes, it is.
It's really all a question of timing, you see, in the end. Between 1:30 and 4:45, it's a different sort of broadcasting. You're linking in outside broadcasts. You're linking in a race meeting, you're linking in a rugby match, and it's all continuous commentary. It all comes together just before 5, and in that 55 minutes, then anything can happen, and you've got to really cover everything. The most satisfying thing for me, and certainly for the editors, is to buy 5 Sunday newspapers on Sunday morning and turn to the sports pages and say, yes, we did that, and we've covered that, and then you feel you've done something. But it's a very concentrated 55 minutes. When the signature tune goes out at the end, you feel you've worked. You know, you feel you've had a fair afternoon, really.
Well, you get the impression that the anchorman certainly has worked throughout the whole program. What is it like in the studio?
Oh God, it's really chaotic.
It sounds so simple when you say we're going over now to Barbados for Chris Martin Jenkins to give a report on a cricket match, and just like that, Chris appears on the line. Obviously, it's not as simple as that.
No. If you were there, for example, let me just the clearest thing is for me to give you a picture. I will be in a studio, which is a very, very large studio. I'm on my own always in that studio. Outside, in the cubicle, through the glass wall, we have something like 12 people working. First of all, there's the producer, and he's the only man who talks to me. He's got assistants around him in the cubicle, but he's the only voice that I hear. He's the only one I take. He's got with him all the engineers who've been there 2 hours before the programme started. They've checked Chris Martin Jenkins in Barbados or wherever it happens to be. They've checked all the outside sources, so that when we go on the air at 1:30, everybody we're going to talk to between then and 5 to 6 has been contacted already. Yes. We shall be with you at 3:10, or we shall be with you at 5 to 4. All that has been very carefully checked. That doesn't mean to say things can't go wrong. They do, of course, they do, and that can be very exciting. I mean, it puts 10 years on your life, but it can be very exciting. But it's all a question of teamwork. You see, the important thing is that talking to a listener ought never to be in a panic. If you're in a panic, it's in your voice. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I must, if I can, remain fairly calm. It doesn't mean to say that listeners don't like things going on. They love it.
Yes. When
they hear there's a chaos and you say, I have no idea where I am here, they love it. I know this. They do. They enjoy it. But you've still got to be professional enough not to not really know where you're going, if you follow. So I rely on a producer. And if a producer was suddenly to say in my ear, I want you to say, broadcasting house is falling down, I would say it. I would say it. You must have implicit faith in your producer. You must never, ever have second thoughts about your producer. I've worked with a man concerned, which is Bob Burrows. I've worked with Bob now for 5 or 6 years. And we have a thing together, a feeling about what's going on. And whatever he says on my earpiece, I would say. We may then discuss it later, and I'd say, I think that timing perhaps was a little wrong there, or you threw me slightly there. But never, ever on the air must you have second thoughts about a command. That's what I mean by teamwork, you see. And I know that that's going on outside. So that I now get to a stage where somebody, for instance, Bob Burrows, may well say to me, we are totally lost out here. And I don't mind him saying that. That doesn't worry me. What it means is that the lines have gone down, which can happen. We're totally lost. And then he just simply says, fill for me. Now, in a studio, I always have alongside me at least 3 or 4 minutes of fill material, what we would call minor items. There may well be a minor tennis tournament, shall we say, in South America, which is worth giving for the tennis enthusiasts, but not for a general audience. I can always fill with that. I always have in front of me exactly what's going on throughout the afternoon, so that I could always say, we're having a little trouble at the moment, but just time for me to tell you that later we've got football for you and tennis and ice hockey, whatever it happens to be. And I must know that I can give him that bridge he needs. In other words, he needn't listen to what's going out on the speaker. He must have faith in me as I do in him. And when he says, I want you to fill for me, he knows he can then turn to the technical problems, ignore me, knowing that I'm waffling away, but at least there's no silence. I'm saying the right things, and then away he goes. So it's faith in each other, but it's enormous teamwork. And I'll tell you, the general feeling among the engineers and the panel workers at home is that if you work on Sports Report, you're supposed to be the best. Technically, you've got to be. We have the best people. There's no disrespect to other programs, but ours is under such pressure that we have very selected people who work for us, and they like working for us. They die by 6 o'clock. They stagger to the bar to get themselves a stiff drink. But they are the best, and we've got to have the best because the program is very sophisticated.
It really is an excellent program. I listen every Saturday. I don't hear the results half the time. I'm listening to. You can't listen to the technical.
No, I know what you mean. If you know
getting the feel of the whole program, how it's done.
Yeah, this is it. You can get this. If you know anything about the business at all, you can feel the way it's coming over. This is the thing. The links, for instance, are very important. You see, a link has got to be a signpost. It's got to be clear. It's got to be clear for the fellow who's driving down the M1 in his car, the fellow who's digging the garden in the summer, the fellow who's chatting in a pub. It's got to be clear. And therefore you'll find if you listen to links, and again, being in the business, you'll know what I mean, if I've just come out and said, using the example you gave, suppose I've just said Christopher Martin Jenkins there in Barbados. If I'm going to rugby, I don't then want to waffle or flannel or be misty. I say Chris Martin Jenkins in Barbados. Now we turn to rugby union.
Yes.
That's all. You don't want anything else. It's got to be absolutely simple. You don't start talking about, well, now this is a very important afternoon for, you've lost them now. You've got to be sharp and clear. That was cricket, now it's rugby. Now you can fill in and say, and of course, what a great day, the last match of the All Blacks on their short tour, they're playing, the Barbarians, but you've got to be sharp and clear. And that's going back to what you're saying about technical efficiency, you see. Your links have got to be clear. As an anchorman, you really are there to set up the Christmas tree. The goodies are all there.
Yes.
The goodies are there. The goodies are the OBs, and whenever I'm out on an OB, whoever happens to be there, we've got 2 very good men who work now. A man called Alan Parry, who I think is a very promising young man. Desmond Lyon.
Young, isn't he?
Yes, he is. Yes, Alan's in his sort of middle 20s, and he's been very lucky in a way, and he's the first to admit this, because we were looking, I didn't want to do it permanently. I feel I'm missing something by being in there all the time, and I'd had a fair whack at it. So we were looking for other people, and we've got Alan Parry and a man called Desmond Lynham.
Desmond I like very much.
Desmond was very good indeed, very good voice, and nicely relaxed. And they therefore work, when I'm out, they work in. And when I'm out, I feel I want the same thing from them as I hope I give when I'm an anchorman, I want simplicity. And the only other thing that you have to have, which I think Alan's now doing well, but found a little difficult at first, And that is, you've got to have the ability to get into something very quickly without it sounding garbled. It may be, for example, that you're just about to cue into some golf, and the producer says, for heaven's sake, get over to the swimming because Wilkie is about to win a gold. Now, he can't tell that unless he happens to have a monitor, and sometimes the timings aren't right. I mean, race meetings are usually fairly clear. You know there's a 2:30 or a 3 o'clock. Now, at that moment, just as your mind is geared to golf, and you're about to say, we're going over to Wentworth, as you're halfway through the sentence, the producer will say, we've got to get to the swimming in Vienna, wherever it is, you see. Now, that's the moment where you must have a command of words, but also simple words. And that's where you've got to say, well, sorry, we were going to golf, we're not, we're going to swimming, it's all happening over two. And that's not easy, it takes time to do that, and as I say, I'm mentioning Alan Parry, he found that quite difficult. I think he's beginning to get it now.
Yes. But quite often you can tell that he is receiving instructions.
Yes. What you must never do is pause. You must never listen really and forget the listener. You've got to go on talking as I'm talking to you now. And it's a knack after a while, really, you know, it's a knack. So I have what we call split headphones. In my right ear I can hear what's going out over the air. In my left ear I can hear the producer. And I must be able to talk as I'm talking to you now, while at the same time he's saying something else to me. But again, you see, it's faith. He wouldn't throw me, he wouldn't give me something, he would never, for example, he would never give me facts. If I was halfway through a sentence on golf, he would never say, and Wilkie's time in that tournament was so-and-so. Now that would be bad. There'd be no faith in each other then. That would be a ridiculous way of feeding information. But what he will do is to say, keep talking about golf, but I want you to switch to something else. And you should be able to absorb that, you know, otherwise you wouldn't be in the business.
At the moment you're doing a personality thing now, going around with a panel game.
Yes.
Quiz.
Yes. Yes.
How does this kind of thing appeal to you?
Appeals to me very much. I had a decision to make, you see, about a year ago as to what exactly I was going to do, because I'd been in the business then long enough to know whether I wanted to go into production or become a director, and one or two other offers were made in other places. And I basically like performing. I like being a commentator, and I had long talks with the BBC, who were extremely kind and helpful. And what I decided I would do would be to stay in the talking business, which is what it is, but breaking out of sport, or not being with sport the whole time. I wouldn't want to be hidebound with sport. Yes. I enjoy it enormously. It's part of my life because I find it exciting, not simply the game, but the people in it. So I branched out from that, and I now do ceremonial occasions, apart from sport. I do the quiz programs, which are very exciting to do. So that in the last few weeks, I've done some European football matches, the quiz, the Lord Mayor's banquet at Guildhall, you know, these things, and I find them, it's because of the variety. Yes. That I enjoy it very much. The quiz in particular is very satisfying, and going back to the same word, it's because of teamwork, because Ted Moult and Brown Johnson are splendid performers. Yes. They're extremely nice people, which matters, because when you're travelling together, you've got to get on together, and we get on very well in trains and planes and hotels and things. We get on very well. They're a great combination. We all three of us know each other, I think, well enough to be able to say terrible and outrageous things, which people accept. But also, they are totally professional. Totally professional. And you see that sometimes when we've had one or two disappointing audiences in terms of numbers. We've sometimes been in places where it's been a filthy night and we've only had 40, 50 people there. And that's when you show that you're a professional. And that's where Ted Moult and Brian Johnson perform even more. Not simply because there's an audience there, but because they're there. They're paid to do it, you see. And so the quiz is a very satisfying thing, but very different for me.
This is probably a leading question. How do you overcome this business of wrong answers?
Well, we try that there shouldn't be wrong answers. The producer, Michael Duke Hastings, has been in the business now over 20 years. He's an excellent producer and a very senior producer in the BBC, and looks after us like a schoolmaster, and he's very good. He has the questions checked very carefully. The problem, of course, about sporting questions is that they very often change. Yes. They change so quickly. Now, if a mistake is made, he is listening. We've got a monitor also behind the scenes or under the stage, wherever we happen to have our engineering set up. And if it's a mistake that we spot during the actual recording, we stop. We rip up the question and we say we do it again. If you find at the end of the broadcast that there is a mistake being made, nothing yet, touch wood, has ever been made dramatically that would affect the contest. Not ever. If you find, however, that a mistake's been made and it's going to offend people, that it may be a very minor one, but if it offends people, then what we do is to record that again. We can't record the answer again because the atmosphere of the hall has gone then. Yes. But I remain behind and I ask the question again, so we get round it that way. But there have been very, very few Very, very few. I'm new in the business. I've only been doing it now for, 18 months. And a man called Alan Williams was doing it before me, a very garrulous Welshman. And over the years, there have been very, very few mistakes that have been made. The awful thing, of course, is if the scoring went wrong.
Yes.
And Michael's been very fortunate. He had some very good secretaries who act as scorers, and I rely totally on her at the moment. I've got to, because I can't think of the score at the same time. I have to try and keep hold of Moult and Johnson, letting them go a little bit, but at the same time keeping the framework of the programme, because otherwise it gets sloppy and untidy. So I can't really work out scores. I rely totally on her. And what would, of course, be a total disaster if we got to the end of the broadcast, and in fact the scores were wrong, because if they were wrong, then it would be a cheat, and we'd have to do it again. I mean, it'd be as simple as that, you see.
The one question that struck in my mind was the one about Brendan Foster.
Mm-hmm.
How did that resolve itself in the end, anyway?
Well, what happens in the end is that if a mistake has been made, you always have what we call a buffer of questions, you see, so that we can always cut out 2 or 3 of the answers and put another one in. This is how it works. The Brendan Foster one was just simply a typing error, frankly. It's something that had been done before and hadn't been checked enough. But it resolves itself. It resolves itself. You just hope they don't happen.
Yes.
But when they do, they resolve themselves. And you're always fair to both teams. You always talk to both teams afterwards and point out exactly what had happened. But as I say, we have very, very few. And we have thousands of questions.
Yes.
Thousands of questions.
Well, you're a confirmed radio man. You've been on radio now for how many years?
Been on radio now for what? For 9, nearly 10 years now. 10 years, yes.
How
10
about
years.
television?
I enjoy television. It's quite a different medium, of course. I used to do a weekly sports program, which was an 8 or 9 minute spot every Monday evening, BBC One. I now do less and less television, except when I'm asked to join in a feature or something of that sort. It is a quite different medium. It's a very exciting medium, obviously, very exciting. One could talk a long time about it. Briefly, radio I think more satisfying, because you're the only one there. In other words, you are talking. Now, if you talk badly, then you should be punished for it. If you talk well, then I hope you should be praised for it. But it can only be your voice. Of course, you've got a team behind you, as I've said, but people are listening to you, and they either like the voice, or they dislike it, or they like what you say, or they think you're talking nonsense, but it's you. In television terms, so many other people matter and have got to matter. The floor manager who's linking you with the director matters, the photography matters, and of course the pictures are far more important in the end than the man who's talking. It's got to be. I have a theory, that if your pictures are right on the screen, you could mouth obscenities for about 15 seconds, and I don't think people would notice. I've got a theory. I'm not prepared to try it out because I would get sacked. But I'm sure this is true, the pictures are much more important. I remember one of the very first things I did, must be about 7 years ago, very first television thing. It was very, very small. It was a very small item on Wimbledon. It only lasted about 5 minutes, but we'd spent a lot of time. That's another thing, of course. Television is an enormous time consumer. Yes. You would spend 3 or 4 days doing a 4-minute feature in television, because you take everybody with you. The cameraman says the light's wrong, so you all retire for a while. It's a very time-consuming thing. But I remember going back to this Wimbledon thing, thinking that it had been quite good. I thought the feature had been quite good in the end. And going to the Bar Television Centre, and in the centre there are screens everywhere. Everybody is watching the programmes that are going on, hoping that somebody would mention the programme that had just been on the air. You have an egotism about you, and you're hoping somebody will say something. And I finally heard somebody mentioning it, and I heard somebody saying he thought it was very good. And one would really not be telling the truth if you didn't say you were pleased to hear that, obviously, because there are fellow professionals around you. And then I listened a little bit more, and I realised that what they were saying was that the pictures were very good. There had been some great shots here, and the theme had been right, you see, which had really had nothing to do with me at all, which is as it should be, because after all, it is a watching thing that matters. As far as I'm concerned, in sporting terms, it's a watching thing. Clearly, there are many, many television programmes where it's absolutely vital what's being said in discussions, obviously. But I find that if you have a picture, you can sometimes take away from the words, and which is why I find radio, if anything, more satisfying as a medium. More satisfying.
In your years in radio, especially on these links, where obviously they're unscripted, unprepared, you suddenly go over to somebody. Has anybody ever dropped you in it?
I don't think so. One tries always that this shouldn't happen. We always think it very unprofessional, and again I keep using this word because it's the best word. It's unprofessional if you in fact were to get any broadcaster in trouble on the air. If he did it to me or I did it to him, there can be annoyance at times. For example, what can annoy commentators is to find the cue into them is too long and gives far too much away. And I can remember a very famous occasion in which I was not involved, when John Arlott, who's one of our greatest cricket commentators, and must be certainly one of the great broadcasters of all time, and John was doing a match at Hampshire, a Hampshire match down at Bournemouth, and the cue-in was something like, well, now for news of the Hampshire-Sussex game. Sussex were 247 in their first innings, Hampshire are 142 at tea, Gilliatt having scored 49, and the first 3 wickets having fallen for 22. Now over to Bournemouth and John Arlott, and he said, well, you have said it all, from Bournemouth, a very good afternoon. Which you have to be a very senior commentator to do, you see. And while John, tongue-in-cheek, later said perhaps he oughtn't to have gone that far, the fact remains that that was a very, very bad cue. A very bad cue. Yes. And so when you say dropped you in it, you hope they never will. You hope that after all, you're setting them up. You're setting them up. If you're an anchorman, you're keeping the programme together. And when afterwards people say, well, that was a very good programme, you realise that most of it is, again, the analogy of the Christmas tree. People looking at the things on the tree. But you've got to keep it upright. That's the important thing of an anchorman. And therefore, a simple, short, direct cue into the fellow concerned, and you hope that it's going to work either way. At times, if people are irritated or annoyed, it creeps into the voice. It ought not to. I know myself how frustrating it can be if you're particularly if you're overseas, you see. I mean, I can remember being in Vienna for the swimming championships during the summer, and wanting the anchorman to come to me because the race was about to begin and there might be a gold medal here. And I know he really can't do that because there's something he can't get out of. But sometimes when you're a commentator, you tend to forget the whole shape of the programme. Yeah. That's the importance of a very good producer. The producer in London looks at the whole programme. If you're at a side of a swimming pool in Vienna, the swimming is the only thing that matters. And you get this blinkered idea of the swimming. You get excited, you're caught up in the atmosphere. If you're at a test match and things are happening, you want them to come to you. If you're in a football match and there's a penalty being taken which could decide, you want them to be with you. Yes. And that's again where you rely on a good producer who looks at the whole thing and says, but in the context of what's happening, we still cannot come to you yet. And sometimes some of the broadcasters we have, perhaps who haven't been in it quite so long, don't appreciate that, and they get the feeling that somehow their particular sport isn't getting a fair crack of the whip. But it is, really, because after all, the producer's looking at the whole afternoon. He wants it to be a good programme, and if he thinks coming to you for the penalty, or coming to you for the start of the 100 metres breaststroke is going to make a good broadcast, he'll clearly come to you, because if he doesn't come to you, it's going to affect his programme. Yes.
One of the men that is introduced every week, he does a brief, I suppose 5 minutes at the very most, Stuart Hall. Mm-hmm. Is there any possibility of Stuart getting more time on the sports programme in the future? Well,
Stuart is a very, very interesting personality. Very interesting personality. I think he's quite happy at the moment because he likes variety. He likes variety. And everything he does has got a little touch of fresh air about it, you know. It's got a nice, his phrasing is right. And I don't think he would want to do more in sports terms. I think he's very happy doing what he does do, with all the other things he does in variety and what have you. But his great gift is freshness, you see. Yes. And if you in fact get up with a hangover, or if you get up wondering how you're going to pay for the mortgage, or if you get up thinking what a wet morning it is, the moment you sit down and the green light goes on, you must forget it. It's essential, because whatever people will tell you, it does come out in your voice. And using Stuart as an analogy, Stuart is always a performer. You've got to perform. I remember going to see Sammy Davis at the Talk of the Town a few years ago, and he has this marvellous singing act, and he also has this great patter in between. And I've always known one little line he gave, which is overemphasising the situation, but he said, I love performing. He said, some actors say, oh, I can't be bothered to give you an autograph. He said, I love giving autographs, because this is what I'm here for. You know, I am an actor, I love it. And when lights go on, I want to perform. And when I get home at night, I open the fridge, the light goes on, and I do a 10-minute act straight away, you know? That's the sort of thing. And that's where Stuart Hall is so very, very good, because at all times, he is a professional performer, whatever he may be feeling at that time personally. And that's why he's got a freshness. He's also got a command of words, but he's fresh, and that's what you really need. Once you start getting bored, it's going to sound in your voice, and the listener's going to get bored.
Because I keep hoping week after week that there'll be a Manchester City or Manchester United home match, and that Stuart will in fact be commentating with you or somebody else. Yes. It just never comes off.
No, well, this is Stuart's own decision. It isn't a question of us not giving him what he would like to do. He would prefer to be doing Miss World one week, if you like, with all respects to Mike Aspel. Yes. Football Report the next, Jeux sans frontières the next, and all the rest of it. He prefers it that way. He prefers it that way, and we are very happy with what he does for us. I don't know. Perhaps their freshness would be lost if he emphasised one way or the other.
Yes. Two final questions. One, who's the sportsman who's impressed you most of all? Not for his sporting activities, but as a personality. And the other one, who's the radio personality who impressed you?
So many. I suppose the one... It's usually Americans who impress you most. It's usually Americans. I remember being very, very impressed with Gary Player, doing a long interview with Gary Player, who impressed me so much with his attitude to life, of saying the important thing is to be positive. Whatever you do, be positive. Don't do it if you're not positive. If you feel you might not be able to do it, then don't do it. And I was very impressed with his strength, physically and mentally. This is a man who can do a 6-hour flight in 2 hours later be on the golf course. One of the great golfers. Yes. And once I started talking about golfers, straight away, you see, I was very, very, very impressed with Arnold Palmer. Arnold Palmer's humility, the first time I met him at Wentworth, that was the thing that impressed me. Here was one of the world's great golfers, and Arnold Palmer wanted to talk about some of the younger men in golf and how lucky he'd been. There are so many. Who else has impressed me? As I say, Americans who...
Muhammad Ali.
Oh, yes, of course. Muhammad is something very special. I've only done one interview with him, and he is the most exciting character. The trouble is, he's such a performer, you'll never quite believe him, you see. He's a very shrewd performer, a great athlete, and in my time, certainly the best boxer I've seen. Very impressive. But if by impressive you mean the sort of characters they are... Oh, another one that impressed me. Oh, we could spend 2 hours on this. Another one who impressed me very much was Jackie Stewart. Yes. Jackie Stewart's always impressed me, again, by the strength of mind of the man. When you talk to a man, you see, you can tell straight away that he's a strong character. All right, so he hurtles around at 150 miles an hour, and he's got to have faith in his hands. All that you'd expect from any racing driver. But it's a little bit more than that. It's the strength that you find in talking to a man. You feel here is a man. And Jackie Stewart certainly gave me that impression. I suppose I just wonder if it's sometimes danger that does this, of course, I think. Because they're dicing with it all the time. Graham Hill is another one that's always a most satisfying person to talk to. But the Americans have a facility, of course, of talking, and they can convey. Generally speaking, American sportsmen tend to be able to convey what they're trying to say to you rather more clearly than we do, I think, on the whole. But that's not a bad selection. Gary Player, Arnold Palmer, Muhammad Ali, and Jackie Stewart. And among the younger men, incidentally, John Conte has impressed me a lot. John Conte, who's only just come on the scene when he won his world title, you will remember, against Ahumada a few weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago now. John Conte is an impressive young man because he knows where he's going.
Yes.
He knows where he's going. I remember doing an interview with him in the studio just before that fight, and the whole time he was talking to me, very relaxed, he was drawing a cartoon. And when he left the studio, we looked at the cartoon, and it was Conte with a crown on, sitting on top of a mountain. And underneath he'd written, "I have tried and I have reached it." Which isn't bad, you know? It wasn't bad. So Conte's impressed me, and I could go on forever. And you say in radio terms, well, certainly one of the most professional men I was lucky enough to meet just before he died, in fact, was Richard Dimbleby. Richard Dimbleby, who said to me two things: prepare, and then prepare it again before you go on the air anywhere. It's sometimes frustrating. You have 50 facts, you only use 5. You come out and you think, oh, was it necessary? It's always necessary. You must always prepare. And the other thing he said was, check it, and then, just for good measure, check it again. And that made Dimbleby a great, great performer. I think I've been very lucky, you see, because when I first came into the business, there were some superb broadcasters just coming to the end. People like John Snagg, the marvellous man who used to do the boat race. Yes. And John Snagg gave me a lot of very good advice. Richard, that I've mentioned. People like Harold Abrahams, who used to do the athletics back in the late 40s and 50s. These were all great radio men. Eamon Andrews obviously stands out as a great radio man. And I've said Eamon, I think he's a much better radio man than a television man. Yes. Much better, because he's got this superb voice. Control, excitement, emotion, he can get all that into his voice. So I, again, was lucky to find these sort of people around. Another one, all the war correspondents that came back into the business, people like Winfred Vaughan Thomas, superb, great radio men, with good, a voice, you see, that must appeal. And they all had this. And I was, again, as I say, lucky enough to meet them all when I first came in, just as they were leaving. And so perhaps a tiny fraction rubbed off. I hope so, because these are the men that really made radio sing. You know, this is what it's all about. And we find in the last year or two that radio is certainly very much coming back into the fore. We find this in figures, for example. And that we feel responsible now, that we've got to produce the very best programs, whether it's sport or whether it's quizzes or whatever it is. We feel now honour bound to produce the very best. And I think we're very lucky because we have a very, very good team working all around us. I'd be lost without any of them. I mean, I just shout away, frankly. I rely on them. And they are marvellous people. And we have, in fact, in radio at the moment, got some excellent men, excellent men.
Give you a final quickie. Have you got a goal in radio?
To go on satisfying some people somewhere, I think. I'm going to irritate people and annoy people, I hope, because it means they're listening and they're interested. And this is clear in letters one gets. You get good letters and bad letters. But if I can give somebody satisfaction somewhere at some time, then that's the goal. If you're satisfying somebody, wherever it may be, then that's good. And if you're doing that, then it's enough.
But in terms of self-satisfaction, is there any type of program that you would like to be associated with?
I don't think so, because I've done most things in radio now, as far as a performer is concerned, in chairing panels, for example, panel games, obviously commentary in football and in swimming and in cricket. The state occasions, which I just started on, I enjoy enormously. Being at the Guild Hall is quite different from being at Main Road. You know, they're quite different challenges. So there's nothing in radio terms that I can't really say, now what I really want to do now is so-and-so. Not really. If anything else would come along, if I feel it's another challenge, then I would be happy to go for it. But I couldn't, hand on heart, at this moment say, if only I could do so-and-so. There isn't anything, frankly, because every new step I've taken has been a challenge. I found it a challenge, which I have to have, frankly. I can't go on without a challenge. I have to have a challenge somewhere. You hope that what comes out is a reasonable product, but you have to have a challenge. So there is nothing in particular that I say I must do that. You just take it week by week. But I'd go back to what I said to start with. You must feel that you're giving satisfaction, that you're pleasing somebody somewhere, or interesting somebody somewhere, even if it means, as has happened to me sometimes, you happen to go into a pub and you hear somebody saying, "Oh, did you hear the programme? I think he's talking a lot of rubbish," or "Yeah, I didn't think it was too bad." And it's quite a good feeling. You sit as far away as possible, not hoping you won't get involved too much in it. But those are the things, you see, that you're making people talk, if you like, and also you're doing it for everybody else, because the producer never gets mentioned, and all the boys who work behind the glass never get mentioned. So if the programme gets a good mention, you feel that perhaps at least you've helped to project it.
Yes.
That's the thing. That's what I mean by satisfaction.
Well, you've given us a lot of satisfaction. Thank you very much indeed.
It was my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks.
Okay.